Welcome back. We are in Numbers chapter 2, and I hope you're enjoying it. I know it is one of the most riveting books in the Bible, or at least that's kind of how you're looking at it right now. But we're going to get to the good part. But these first few chapters are kind of a setup. Uh, God's showing them where He wants them to go and how He wants them to set up their community, their government, everything, their army. And so part of this is going to seem like, why do we need to know any of this stuff? The details aren't that important. The key is to learn the patterns. And so that's what we're trying to do. What principles and patterns is God showing us that He wants us to see, especially in the New Testament and as we move through the Old Testament? So let's get started. And I'll read from the New Living Translation because this is pretty good translation. There's not a whole lot of difference between the two. And also they put the numbers in little charts, and so we'll go from there. It says this: Then the Lord gave these instructions to Moses and Aaron. When the Israelites set up camp, each tribe will be assigned its own area. The tribal divisions will camp beneath the family banners on all four sides of the tabernacle, but at some distance from it. That'll be important. The divisions of Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun are to camp toward the sunrise on the east side of the tabernacle, beneath their family banners. These are the names of the tribes, their leaders, and their numbers of the registered troops. So the total of all, and skipping down to verse 9, so the total of all the troops on Judah's side of the camp is 186,400. These three tribes are to lead the way whenever the Israelites travel to a new campsite. The divisions of Reuben, Simeon, and Gad are to camp on the south side of the tabernacle beneath their family banners. These are the names of the tribes, their leaders, and the numbers of their registered troops. And then we skip down to 16. So the total number of troops on Reuben's side of the camp is 151,450. These three tribes will be second line whenever the Israelites travel. Then the tabernacle, carried by the Levites, will set out from the middle of the camp. All the tribes are to travel in the same order that they camp, each in position under the appropriate family banner. The divisions of Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin are to camp on the west side of the tabernacle beneath their family banners, and these are the names of the tribes, their leaders, and the number of their registered troops. Jump down to 24. So the total of the troops on Ephraim's side of the camp is 108,100. These three tribes will be third in line whenever the Israelites travel. The divisions of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali are to camp on the north side of the tabernacle beneath their family banners. These are the names of the tribes, their leaders, and the numbers of their registered troops. Jump down to 31. So the total of all the troops on Dan's side of the camp is 157,600. These three tribes will be last marching under the banners whenever the Israelites travel. In summary, the troops of Israel listed by their families total 603,550. Now, these are the fighting troops, not just people. But as the Lord had commanded, the Levites are not included in this registration. So the people of Israel did everything as the Lord had commanded Moses. Each clan and family set up camp and marched under the banners exactly as the Lord had instructed them. So they're told how to set up camp and when to deploy. And those of us that have been in the military or associated with the military in any way know that kind of order and pre-planning is vital, because you need to know where everybody is and what their responsibilities are. Otherwise, you could get in a whole lot of trouble if you come up against an enemy. So they are set up their tent village around the holy sanctuary, a kind of square formation with each division consisting of three tribes. Why a square? Well, because Ramses II used this formation back in Egypt. The royal tent of the Pharaoh was in the middle of, and battalions were assigned to each side to protect the tent, to protect the main person. And the great visual here is, and he used this because the Israelites knew it, having lived in Egypt, but they were familiar with this, and it meant that the center person, the Ramses II, was the most valuable. Well, what God's showing them is his sanctuary is the most valuable. That's where they need to protect. So Some of the customs he changed, and some he outlawed, and some he just gave a different meaning to because they were familiar. Their ways became stranger and stranger, though, to the outside world, because as we talked about, it's a progressive revelation. So he'll start to change things to make them even more different than the rest of the world, because we're supposed to be set apart. So we're we were saved inside the environment and culture we were familiar with. You know, God doesn't save us and then make us go far off and live completely different. He does it within the culture and the environment that we live in. So over time, the internal changes began to show up externally as we start to live a little differently. So eventually, we start looking pretty strange to the world, and the world looks even stranger to us. I know people that, like, you know, I tell this story of this guy. We were at this funeral at his church, and it was from a work uh, person that we worked with, his funeral, and so a lot of work people were there. And people kept saying to him, "I had no idea you were a Christian." And that just broke his heart, because he thought, I don't live any different than anybody else around me. And he changed his life from there, because he really wanted to stand out and look different. Otherwise, what's the point of being different and following God if you're going to look like the world? So each Israelite camp, with the unit that he belongs to, as determined by the census. So once they did the census, they figured out where everybody goes, and each banner kind of represent their unit. So the order of the tribes is Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun on the east side, the front of the wilderness tabernacle. This is the prime position of order. We talked about this in the past. The east always signifies the most important in the Bible, not in the world, because obviously Texas is more important than the East Coast. But so this is the prime position of honor, though, for these tribes and the way God saw it. So Judah is the leader of the three tribe division, too. Judah obtained this right to lead because Judah replaced Reuben. And you can see that back in our discussion during Genesis. Reuben camped with Simeon and Gad and formed the southern division. To the west was Ephraim with Manasseh and Benjamin, and the least important division, the north, was Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. So these camping positions also dictated marching order. Verse 17 then tells us that after the division of Reuben, but before the next division, the wilderness tabernacle was to be taken. So the Levites, carrying and protecting the tent shrine, were to be in the middle of the marching column. So they're the very center and most protected. To the east were what we call the Leah tribes. That is the biological mother of Judah and the other two tribes. To the south, we find three more Leah tribes. Reuben was the biological son of Leah, as was Simeon. But Gad was not. He was the son of Leah's handmaiden Zilpah. However, by law, Zilpah was a surrogate mother for Leah, so Gad was counted as among the sons of Leah. We talked a lot about that in Genesis. So to the west were the Rachel tribes led by Ephraim. Ephraim and Manasseh did not have Rachel as a biological mother. She was the biological mother of Joseph, who was the biological father of Ephraim and Manasseh, something that had been ordained during that cross-handed blessing that we all read about in Genesis. And then to the north were the remaining three tribes led by Dan. They were all sons of Jacob's concubines, Leah and Rachel's handmaidens. Judah is the lead tribe and Dan is the lowest. That's chapter 2 of Numbers. I know it was riveting, it was amazing, and you just never saw any of that coming. I know. But stick with me, because what we're doing is we're setting up the marching order, and we're setting up the hierarchy of the tribes of Israel. And this becomes really important, kind of like in Genesis when we talked about the cross-handed blessing, because a lot of these names and stuff and how they interact and are eventually absorbed into other tribes, we're going to see based on this order and how they're set up. So that's chapter 3 of Numbers. Don't forget, love God, love people, and change the world.